Are you mating with all species? Can you do it with me, alien girl? Elia's ward had never expected that a simple invitation to the neutral star station would change the way humanity was viewed in the galaxy. For years, humans had been a subject of curiosity. Other species whispered about them in hallways and conference chambers. They had noticed how humans laughed, cried, argued, and made friends across borders, even across planets. It was baffling, and some called it dangerous. But Elias, a human cultural liaison, had always thought of it as normal. That was until he met Lurathen. Lurathen was young by her species standards, with shimmering skin that reflected light like oil on water and eyes that shifted color depending on her emotions. She was here on the station as a researcher, studying humans, though she avoided direct interaction with most. She observed them from afar, jotting down notes, asking questions, and occasionally attempting to mimic a smile. But there was something different about Elias. He was patient, calm, and attentive in a way that made her want to speak. It was a quiet evening in the station's observation lounge. The stars outside stretched endlessly, a tapestry of light and dark that no one species could claim as their own. Elias sat at a small table, sipping a cup of hot tea from a human-designed mug he had carried across star systems. Lurathen appeared silently beside him, her presence so quiet that Elias did not notice at first. "Human," she said, her voice melodic but slightly uneven, "I have a question for you." Elias looked up, surprised. He had grown used to being observed, but rarely directly addressed by someone so young and serious. "I am listening," he replied, smiling gently. Lurathen's eyes focused on his in a way that made him feel the weight of her curiosity. "Are you mating with all species?" she asked, her words careful but blunt. "And can you do it with me?" Elias blinked. He had heard rumors about how his species, tendencies could confuse others, but this was direct. He realized quickly that her species did not understand humans' idea of bonding. To them, mating was a formal process, strictly regulated and deeply significant. Humans, however, could form bonds in many ways, emotionally and intellectually, without the same rigid structure. He chose his words carefully. "Humans do not bond with others simply because they can," he said. "We bond because we choose to. It is not easy and it is not automatic. We value understanding and trust above all else." Lurathen tilted her head, her eyes flickering through shades of blue and green. "But you can bond with anyone?" she asked. There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine wonder. "Any species?" "Yes," Elias said softly, "but only if we feel it is right, only if we find meaning together. It is not a test or a game, it is a decision." For a long moment, Lurathen was silent. Elias watched her, intrigued by how alien she looked when thinking so hard, her body slightly trembling as if the very act of thought was physical. Then slowly she spoke again. "I have never bonded outside my species," she admitted. "We do not trust. We believe only those of our kind can truly understand us. But I want to know if it is possible." Elias nodded, understanding the depth of her vulnerability. This was not a trivial request. It was a question that could redefine how her species viewed the universe and humanity. "If you are willing, I can show you, but it is not something to rush. We will take it step by step, slowly, so you can understand what it means." Her eyes brightened, a mixture of relief and excitement. "I wish to try," she whispered. The next several days were filled with quiet interactions. They spent hours talking, exchanging stories about home, about family, about dreams. Lurathen listened with intense focus as Elias described the human way of forming bonds, of choosing friends, partners, and companions. She was fascinated by the concept that humans could feel a connection without any formal requirement, without waiting for a ritual or ceremony. One evening, they sat near the observation windows, watching a nearby planet rotate beneath the station. The planet was rich with forests and oceans, its surface alive with color. Elias described how humans found beauty in difference and imperfection. Lurathen listened carefully, absorbing every word. "Your species, it is strange," she said, her voice soft. "You choose to care. You choose to accept risk in order to connect. That is not natural for most of us." "Perhaps it is natural for us," Elias replied, "but it is also a choice. We could ignore it. We could stay isolated, but we do not. Connection matters more than safety or convenience." She looked at him, her colors shifting to deep indigo. "Then, I want to understand that," she said. "I want to know what it means to be chosen." The process was subtle. It was not physical, not in the way her species usually considered bonding. They shared memories and stories, experiences that brought joy, sadness, or fear. They laughed and cried together in moments of pure trust. Lurathen began to understand that humans did not bond through obligation or biology alone. They bonded through choice, through shared understanding, and through willingness to be vulnerable. The other species on the station watched cautiously. The Assembly, a council of representatives from dozens of civilizations, had been observing humans for years, but nothing like this had ever occurred. They debated in whispers, concerned that human behavior might destabilize interspecies relations. If humans could bond universally, what did that mean for species that valued isolation or hierarchy? One afternoon, Lurathen confided in Elias that she felt strange emotions she could not name. "It is not fear," she said. "It is anticipation and perhaps something like trust." "I feel lighter when I am with you," Elias smiled. "That is the beginning," he said. "You are learning to connect without fear. That is how humans form bonds. We take risks with our hearts because we believe connection is worth it." Days turned into weeks. Each interaction strengthened their bond, and slowly, Lurathen began to change. Her species, cautiousness and hesitation gave way to curiosity and openness. She laughed more freely, asked questions without hesitation, and started to see humans not as anomalies, but as examples of what connection could be. Then, one quiet night, the Assembly formally intervened. Representatives from several species approached Elias and Lurathen, their faces serious. "This experiment cannot continue unchecked," one said. "The consequences of universal bonding are unpredictable. If humanity can bond with anyone, we must know the limits." Elias listened calmly. "There are no limits," he said simply. "Humans do not bond to dominate, we bond to understand, that is all." Lurathen turned to him, eyes wide with determination. "I choose to continue," she said. "I choose to see this through not because it is a test, but because it matters to me. Do you accept my choice?" Elias reached out and gently placed his hand near hers, a human gesture of affirmation. "I do," he said, "and I will walk with you through this step by step." The Assembly watched, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and unease. Some species whispered to each other, debating whether humans were dangerous or miraculous or simply impossible to understand. But Elias did not care. He was not trying to convince them. He was trying to show Lurathen what it meant to be human, to choose connection even when it was difficult, even when it was unfamiliar. As they sat together beneath the endless stars, Lurathen asked softly, "Is this what it means to be chosen?" Elias smiled, his eyes reflecting the distant galaxies. "Yes," he said, "it is a choice, not a demand. It is trust, not obligation, and you are free to decide what that means for yourself." For the first time in her life, Lurathen felt the warmth of understanding. It was not just a bond. It was a promise that she could explore the universe without fear, that she could connect with someone who did not expect perfection, and that she could learn to trust in the value of choice. And in that quiet moment, as the stars turned slowly above them, something remarkable happened. Lurathen smiled openly, without fear or hesitation, and Elias knew that the beginning of something extraordinary had just started. Humanity had not conquered through force or authority. It had reached out through choice, through empathy, and through the simple, powerful act of saying yes when another asked. It was a small act, but it would echo far beyond the walls of the station, beyond the stars, and into the hearts of countless beings who had never before dared to trust. The days on the neutral star station passed quietly, yet the atmosphere was charged with tension. The Assembly had decided to watch Elias and Lurathen closely, but their scrutiny only seemed to make the bond between human and alien stronger. Lurathen had never imagined the universe could feel so vast, and yet so personal at the same time. Every conversation with Elias opened a new world for her, ideas about trust, friendship, and understanding that her species had never explored. Elias remained patient and steady, never rushing her, never forcing understanding. He shared small human habits with her, the way they laughed at minor mistakes, how they shared stories to pass time, and how they often found comfort in simple acts of kindness. Lurathen found herself fascinated by everything, from the patterns of human speech to the subtle ways they expressed care. It was not biology, not instinct, that made humans capable of bonding so widely. It was choice, intention, and empathy. One morning, the station's observation deck was bathed in the light of a nearby sun. Elias and Lurathen sat on a low bench, watching the gas giant spinning slowly below. Its swirling clouds reminded her of her childhood home, yet now, seen through Elia's stories, it seemed alive with possibility. "I never thought it could feel like this," Lurathen admitted softly. "Before, bonding was calculated. We waited for perfection, for exact compatibility, but now I feel as though the universe itself is opening to me." Elias looked at her with a warm, steady gaze. "Humans understand that connection is worth the risk," he said. "We accept imperfection because without it we would never learn or grow. Connection is not about sameness, it is about understanding and acceptance." She tilted her head, considering his words. "I see it now. It is not a limitation, it is a freedom." The Assembly's representatives continued to observe them, sending periodic inquiries and subtle questions meant to challenge Elia's explanations. "What is the limit of your bonding?" one asked. "Can it reach anyone, any species? What is the consequence of such universal connection?" Elias answered each question patiently, always returning to the same principle. "Humans bond because they choose to, not because they are forced or obligated. There are no limits, except the willingness of the other to participate. Our bonds are built on trust, not dominance." Some species were skeptical. They whispered that humans could be dangerous, that their ability to bond universally could disrupt centuries of cultural structure. Others were intrigued, curious if this human way could offer new paths to understanding. Lurathen, listening quietly, realized that her feelings were beginning to influence the perspectives of those around her. Humans had not been trying to impress the galaxy. They had simply acted as they always did. In the evenings, she and Elias continued their compatibility exercises, which were unlike anything her species had ever attempted. They shared memories, not as records, but as experiences, feeling one another's emotions without judgment. Lurathen found herself laughing at moments she had thought she would never enjoy, feeling pride at accomplishments she had thought insignificant, and understanding sorrow in ways that were no longer distant or theoretical. One day she turned to Elias with a question she had been holding back. "Do you ever fear that this understanding could harm someone?" Elias thought for a moment. "Fear exists for everyone," he said, "but we do not let it stop us from connecting. Fear can guide us to be careful, but it cannot replace the value of trust. If connection is denied because of fear, then no one wins. The bond itself is worth more than the risk." Lurathen nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. For the first time, she understood that human courage was not about physical strength or battles. It was about emotional bravery, the willingness to expose one's heart to another. Weeks passed, and the Assembly began to notice the transformation. Where Lurathen had once been cautious and distant, she was now confident and open. Other young researchers on the station began to watch her, asking questions about humans, intrigued by what they observed. Elias realized that their influence was subtle but profound. They were not changing anyone by force. They were showing, through example, that choice, trust, and understanding could transcend cultural boundaries. One evening, as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation windows, Lurathen asked Elias a question that had been on her mind since the beginning. "Do you believe that humans can bond with any species, even if they are very different?" Elias smiled. "Yes," he said. "But not just because of differences, because connection is about willingness. It is about empathy. If another is willing to open their heart, humans can meet them there. That is our power." Lurathen's skin shimmered with a deep, glowing green. "Then we are not limited," she whispered. "Not by biology, not by culture, we can choose." "Yes," Elias said softly, "choice is everything." The following days brought a subtle but undeniable shift in the station. Representatives from various species approached them cautiously, curious about the human method of bonding. They did not force themselves into exercises, nor did they demand results, but they watched and listened, quietly learning. Lurathen, once hesitant to step outside her species' norms, now served as a bridge, demonstrating that connection was not a violation, but an opportunity. The Assembly called a formal meeting to discuss the outcome of Elias and Lurathen's trial. The hall was filled with species of all shapes and sizes, and all eyes were on the human and alien pair. "This experiment challenges everything we believed about compatibility," a representative said. If humans can bond universally, what becomes of species that have long relied on strict traditions? Elias stepped forward calmly. Humans do not bond to erase differences or dominate, he said. We bond to understand. Connection is not a weapon, it is a choice. That is why it is so powerful. Lurathan added, her voice steady. It is not perfection that matters, it is willingness. If another is willing, you can meet them where they are, and they can meet you where you are. That is all. The assembly murmured among themselves. Some were skeptical, others hesitant, but a few began to nod. They realized that what humans offered was not interference, but an example of what could happen when fear did not dictate interaction. In the quiet moments afterward, Lurathan turned to Elias. Do you think this will change the galaxy? She asked. Elias considered the question. It may, he said. Not immediately and not in ways we can control, but small changes made by choice and trust can ripple outward. One bond can inspire another, and another until something new becomes possible. Lurathan smiled, understanding for the first time the true depth of human courage. It was not in fighting or conquest, but in the simple, deliberate act of opening oneself to another. Then, she said softly, I am ready to continue with you. Elias reached out, and for the first time their hands met in a gesture that transcended species. It was not a ritual, not a command, not an obligation. It was choice. It was trust. It was connection. The stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter, as if acknowledging the moment. Across the station, whispers of human methods of bonding began to spread. Other species began to experiment quietly, inspired by the simplicity and power of choice. They did not always understand it fully, but they could see the effect it had on Lurathan and Elias. Days later, Lurathan repeated the question that had begun their journey. Can you do it with me? Elias smiled, a calm certainty in his eyes. I already am, he said. That simple affirmation carried more meaning than any formal declaration. It was not a promise of dominance, of control, or even of exclusivity. It was a promise of understanding, empathy, and willingness. It showed that humans could inspire change not through force, but through the simple act of being willing to connect. As the observation deck grew quiet, and the stars drifted silently beyond the station, Elias and Lurathan remained side by side, sharing thoughts, stories, and dreams. The assembly, still observing, began to see that the human method of bonding was not a threat, but a gift, a demonstration that emotional courage could surpass fear and choice could surpass tradition. Humanity had not conquered by strength, nor had it imposed its ways. It had reached out, simply, patiently, and with empathy, and in doing so it began to change not just one species, but the understanding of connection across the galaxy. Lurathan felt a warmth she could not describe, a certainty she had never known. For the first time, she knew that trust could extend beyond the limits of her own kind. She knew that connection was not a violation, but a bridge. She knew that humans did not bond because they had to, but because they chose to. And as she looked at Elias, she understood that this choice was the most powerful thing in the universe. Not technology, not weapons, not laws, but the quiet, steady, brave act of saying yes. For Lurathan, for Elias, and for humanity, the galaxy had opened a little wider, and the future was full of possibility. The galaxy was changing, though no one could say exactly how. Small ripples of curiosity and trust spread quietly from the neutral star station outward into distant systems. Species that had once been suspicious of humanity now began to observe more closely, wondering if humans were truly as extraordinary as they seemed. Elias and Lurathan were no longer alone in their journey. They had become the living proof that choice and empathy could transcend species, culture, and fear. Lurathan had grown into her role as both learner and teacher. She spent hours with other young researchers, explaining the exercises she had practiced with Elias. She showed them how humans shared experiences not to manipulate or control, but to understand and connect. Her skin shimmered as she demonstrated, and her voice carried a quiet confidence that drew listeners in. Even the most cautious species began to soften, intrigued by what she had discovered. Elias watched her quietly, a sense of pride mingled with awe. Lurathan had started as an observer, hesitant and unsure, and now she was a bridge between species. He understood that the true power of humans was not in technology or strategy, but in their emotional bravery, the courage to reach out even when the other might refuse. One afternoon, as they walked through the station's gardens, an artificial park that mimicked Earth's forests, Lurathan paused. "Elias," she said, "do you think all species can learn this, to bond without fear, to choose connection freely?" Elias considered the question carefully. "Not all will choose to," he said. "Some are too afraid, some are too rigid, but the potential exists, and every time one being chooses trust, it makes it easier for the next. Connection grows like that, slowly, quietly, and eventually it changes everything." Her eyes reflected the simulated sunlight filtering through the glass domes. "Then we must be patient," she said. "We cannot force them. We can only show them what is possible." Elias nodded. "Exactly. Patience is as human as courage. We act, but we respect choice." As days turned into weeks, the influence of human methods became increasingly visible. Researchers from other species began to experiment with sharing memories and emotions in their own way. Some hesitated, fearful of vulnerability, but others embraced the exercises with wonder and excitement. Lurathan acted as a guide, always careful to ensure that no one felt pressured. Her role was no longer just about learning, she was teaching a new way of seeing connection. The assembly continued to watch closely, their debates growing more animated. Some species argued that humans were disrupting the natural order. Others countered that humans were simply showing what had always been possible, and that the galaxy could benefit if more beings learned to trust and empathize. The discussions often became heated, yet Elias and Lurathan remained focused on their own path, unconcerned by politics. They understood that real change started with individuals, not councils. One evening, as the station orbited a pale blue star, Lurathan approached Elias with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever feel lonely, Elias, when you see how much trust humans can give, yet so few truly understand it?" Elias smiled softly. "Loneliness exists, yes," he said. "But humans do not fear it the way others might. We accept it as part of life, and even in moments of solitude, we can reach out through understanding, through empathy. That is what keeps us connected." Lurathan reflected on this for a long moment. She had never known a species that valued connection so highly, that saw the courage in emotional risk rather than physical power. "Then it is not just bonding," she said quietly. "It is a way of seeing the universe. Humans, you make space for others even when it is uncomfortable." Elias nodded. "Yes, that is what it means to be human. We do not always succeed, but we always try. We always choose." Their conversations became deeper, touching on philosophy, hope, and the possibilities of a galaxy where empathy could guide decisions. They spoke of planets where communication was rare, of civilizations that had been isolated for millennia, and of the potential for humans and those willing to learn to bridge gaps that once seemed insurmountable. One day, representatives from several systems approached Lurathan and Elias with a request. "We have observed your methods," one said, "and we wish to try it ourselves. Will you guide us?" Elias exchanged a glance with Lurathan. He could see the mixture of excitement and fear on their faces. "We can show you," he said, "but the choice is yours. Connection cannot be forced. You must be willing to trust." The representatives nodded, some hesitant, others eager. Lurathan stepped forward, her voice calm and assured. "We will guide you, but you must be ready to experience without judgment. This is not a test. It is an opportunity to see each other clearly." The sessions began slowly. Some participants laughed nervously as they shared memories and emotions. Others cried quietly, overwhelmed by the intensity of human empathy. Elias and Lurathan remained patient, providing reassurance and guidance. And as the days passed, small breakthroughs occurred. Walls of fear and skepticism began to crumble, replaced by curiosity and understanding. The changes were subtle at first. One researcher found joy in the small achievements of another species. Another realized that a difference in appearance or habit did not prevent genuine friendship. The ripple of connection spread quietly, yet powerfully, through the station. During one particularly quiet night, Lurathan turned to Elias. "Do you think humanity's choice to bond can truly reach across the galaxy?" she asked. Elias smiled, looking at the stars beyond the station's glass walls. "It already has," he said. "Even if only a few beings are willing, the example spreads. It is not about immediate transformation, but about showing what is possible. Trust and empathy are contagious when they are genuine." Lurathan felt a warmth in her chest, a certainty she had never experienced before. "Then we are not alone," she said. Even if others are afraid, our choices matter. Yes, Elias said, they matter more than we can imagine. Weeks passed, and the bond between human and alien became a quiet legend on the station. Stories of their exercises spread not as commands, but as inspiration. Species that had once dismissed humans as naive now watched carefully, some eager to learn, others cautiously curious. Lurathen felt proud of what they had accomplished. She had not only learned from Elias, but she had become a teacher, a guide for those willing to try a new way of understanding. One morning, as the twin suns rose over the artificial horizon of the station, Elias and Lurathen walked side by side through the gardens. Lurathen paused, looking out at the sky filled with stars and distant planets. Elias, she said softly, do you think this is only the beginning? Elias nodded. Yes, the beginning is always the hardest part, but once one being chooses trust, it becomes easier for the next. And then the next, that is how change grows. Lurathen's eyes shimmered with a vibrant light. Then we will continue, she said, not because we are perfect, but because we are willing. Yes, Elias said, smiling, that is all that matters. As they continued to walk, the station around them seemed to hum with quiet life. Researchers practiced new methods of connection, some laughing, some crying, but all learning. The ripple of choice and trust spread further than either of them could see, reaching across corridors, decks, and even into the hearts of observers who had once doubted. One evening, after a long day of exercises, Lurathen asked again, softly, almost shyly, Elias, do you think we could reach even the most distant species, those who have never known empathy or trust? Elias considered this. We may not reach everyone, he said. But even if we reach 1 or 2 or 10, the example will remain. The choice is contagious. Empathy cannot be forced, but it can be shown. That is how humanity changes the universe. Lurathen smiled. She realized then that their work was not about perfection, not about immediate transformation. It was about the courage to choose connection over and over again and to show others that they could too. She understood that this was the true power of humans, the ability to make a small act of trust echo across worlds. As the stars twinkled outside, Lurathen felt a quiet joy. For the first time, she knew that connection was not limited by species, culture, or fear. It was limited only by willingness, by courage, and by choice. She turned to Elias, her colors shimmering with warmth and understanding. Can you do it with me? She asked once more, not out of doubt, but out of affirmation. Elias smiled, taking her hand gently in his own. I already am, he said, his voice steady and calm. And in that moment, they both knew the truth of humanity. It was not power or force that could change the galaxy, but the quiet, steady, unyielding act of choosing trust, of choosing connection, and of choosing to understand. The galaxy was vast, full of doubt, fear, and distance. But Elias and Lurathen had shown that even across that distance, even across differences, bonds could be formed. And as the stars continued their silent dance outside the station, a new possibility stretched across the universe. A galaxy where choice, empathy, and connection could define the future, and humanity was at the heart of it all. And so their journey continued, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as witnesses, guides, and examples of what was possible when beings chose to reach out to one another, and to say yes to connection, again and again. Months had passed on the neutral star station since Elia's end. Lurathen first began their exercises of connection. What started as a private experiment had grown into something that touched nearly everyone aboard the station. Small clusters of species tried the human method of bonding, some cautiously, some boldly, and all learning in their own ways. The quiet ripple of empathy that humans had sparked was becoming noticeable even beyond the station's walls. Lurathen had changed profoundly since her first hesitant steps toward connection. She moved with more confidence now, her shimmering skin reflecting a calm strength. Where once she had feared the unknown, she now embraced it. She could feel how much the others on the station had started to watch her, learning not from commands, but from her example. Elias noticed it too, though he never commented. He was content to let her grow and observe the subtle influence humans had on her species and beyond. One morning, Lurathen approached Elias in the gardens. Do you think they will ever understand fully? She asked, gesturing to a group of alien researchers who were tentatively sharing thoughts and memories. All the species, will they ever truly see what connection can do? Elias paused, looking at the cluster of beings who were visibly struggling but persisting in the exercises. Some will, he said carefully. Others may take longer, but understanding is not always immediate. It grows slowly and sometimes in ways we cannot measure. Even a single connection can spark changes that spread over generations. She nodded thoughtfully. Then our work, it is bigger than just us. Yes, Elias said, and that is why it is important to be patient, to keep showing what is possible even if it seems small. The station had begun to hum with a quiet energy. Species that had once been isolated or suspicious now wandered into the gardens, the observation rooms, and the memory-sharing chambers. Some approached Lurathen and Elias directly, while others observed from a distance. What they all sought was understanding, not because it was required, but because they had seen the results firsthand. During one afternoon session, Lurathen guided a small group through an exercise in empathy. A species that had rarely interacted with outsiders was paired with another that was equally reclusive. At first, there was tension, memories were withheld, emotions were guarded. But under Lurathen's calm guidance and Elias' patient support, the participants began to open, sharing simple experiences and small joys. Elias watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. "It is always the same," he said softly to Lurathen as they observed. At first, fear dominates, but when someone is willing to share, the other begins to trust. That is the spark that changes everything. Lurathen smiled. "I never thought it would feel like this," she admitted. "I have seen beings laugh, cry, and feel joy together who never imagined it was possible, and it feels right." "Yes," Elias said. "That is the human way. We do not impose, we offer choice, and that choice, when accepted, creates real change." The assembly had continued their oversight, but even they were beginning to understand the depth of the influence. A representative from a distant system approached them during a quiet moment. "I had my doubts," they said, "but I see now that connection is not weakness. It is strength, the ability to bond willingly. It is more powerful than many weapons or laws." Elias nodded. "Connection is power only when it is genuine. That is why humans never force it. We offer it freely, and we accept when others choose it." The representative looked thoughtful. "Then perhaps humanity has more to teach than we realized." Lurathen's eyes reflected a soft glow. "It is not about teaching," she said. "It is about showing, and the choice is always theirs." Over time, the station itself began to change. The once quiet halls were now filled with discussions about trust, empathy, and cooperation. Species that had once avoided one another now sat together, sharing meals, stories, and even memories in cautious exercises. Lurathen and Elias moved among them, not as leaders, but as guides, offering encouragement and answering questions. One evening, as the station rotated around a distant sun, Lurathen asked Elias to join her at the observation deck. They stood in silence, watching a cluster of planets spinning slowly beneath the stars. "Do you think this can reach beyond the station?" she asked. "Beyond this star system?" Elias considered this. "It already has begun," he said. "Every being that chooses connection will carry it with them. They may share it with others who may share it again. This is how humans influence the galaxy, not by force but by choice and example." Lurathen smiled. "Then we are planting seeds." "Yes," Elias said. "Seeds that can grow anywhere, even in places we may never see." The ripple of influence was not always smooth. Some species resisted, clinging to fear, tradition, or pride. Others misunderstood the exercises, believing them to be tests of loyalty or weakness. But Elias and Lurathen did not force participation. They offered understanding, answered questions, and waited patiently. And slowly, those who observed from a distance began to see the results. Beings who had been cautious or fearful now laughing together, listening to each other, learning in ways that had once seemed impossible. One day, Lurathen approached Elias with a question she had not voiced before. "Do you ever tire of always being the human example, always showing what is possible?" Elias smiled softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but humans understand that effort is part of connection. We give because it matters, not because it is easy, and seeing others grow, that is its own reward." She nodded. "Then it is not just about trust, it is about hope." "Yes," Elias said. "Trust and hope together can create something stronger than fear or doubt." As weeks passed, the exercises expanded. Small groups began to form across species lines, trying new methods of sharing and bonding. Lurathen watched with fascination as a previously isolated species began to laugh at a shared memory with another. their skin patterns brightening in unrestrained joy. She realized that connection could be contagious, spreading quietly and powerfully beyond the intentions of any single being. Elias and Lurathan began to consider the future. "We cannot predict how far this will go," Elias said, "but every choice to connect is a step forward. Every being that tries, that is progress." Lurathan nodded. "Then we will continue, no matter how small the effect, it matters." One evening, after a long day guiding new participants, Lurathan stood beside Elias on the observation deck. "Do you think humans are special?" she asked softly. "Not better, but different." Elias looked out at the stars, considering the question. "We are different because we choose," he said. "We choose empathy, connection, and understanding even when it is hard. That choice sets us apart, and it allows us to inspire others without forcing them. That is our gift." She felt a warmth spread through her, a certainty she had never known. "Then we will carry it forward," she said. "Together." "Yes," Elias replied, taking her hand gently. Together. The galaxy was vast and full of unknowns, but Elias and Lurathan understood that small, consistent acts of trust and connection could ripple outward, changing hearts and minds across systems. They watched as more species began to experiment, laugh, cry, and learn together, understanding that the human way was not a rule, but a choice. One night, as the twin suns dipped below the artificial horizon, Lurathan repeated the question that had started it all, but now with certainty and joy. "Can you do it with me?" Elias smiled, the calm certainty in his eyes unwavering. "I already am," he said, and she felt the truth of it in every particle of her being. The galaxy might still hold fear, conflict, and doubt, but they had seen the power of choice, empathy, and connection. And humanity had proven that even in the vastness of space, bonds could form, hearts could open, and change could spread quietly, steadily, and profoundly. Lurathan realized then that the true strength of humans was not their technology, their ships, or even their ideas, but their courage to connect, to trust, and to choose empathy when it mattered most. That choice could travel across worlds, across species, and across generations. And as they stood side by side looking out at the stars, Elias and Lurathan knew that the journey was far from over. It had only just begun. Every being who chose connection was part of a growing ripple, one that could change the galaxy in ways no one could yet imagine. The station hummed quietly around them, the light of distant suns reflecting on the walls, and the universe seemed just a little brighter, a little closer, and full of possibilities. Humanity, through choice and understanding, had become a quiet force of hope. And so Elias and Lurathan continued, guiding, inspiring, and walking the path of connection together, knowing that one simple act, choosing to bond, to trust, and to understand, could echo across the stars forever.